Writer and comedian Michelle Acourt.
Pleasure to be here. Ngā mihi.
And consulting and business and trade commentator, is that all right? Stephen Jacoby.
Sounds great to me, thanks very much. All the best, New Zealand.
Wallace Chapman will be back tomorrow and Lisa Owen has Checkpoint next. Good afternoon.
Whakarongo mai koe ke te reo irurangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, Corrections is forced to apologise for its degrading and inhumane treatment of female prisoners. But what's actually going to change in our jails? The Aussie travel bubble has just bounced down the road with the Prime Minister announcing a date for a quarantine-free travel. Is the Sky Path, a cycleway over the Harbour Bridge, a pie in the sky? The under-fire ports of Auckland is in for a grilling over its safety and performance record, but why is it happening behind council's closed doors? And is the Agriculture Minister suffering from a case of foot and mouth over comments about the tourism industry? And lockdowns and job losses haven't stopped the pokies gobbling up bellyfuls of coin.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. New Zealanders will find out on April the 6th when the Trans-Tasman bubble will be opened. Making the announcement a short time ago, the Prime Minister said a range of conditions have to be met before the bubble can open. She says they include making sure there are measures in place if COVID cases arise in Australia, that contact tracing for visitors is effective, and that airports and airlines are ready.
What I want to do, though, is make sure that when we do that, we know we're ready, that we have a plan in place if in the near term we have an outbreak, and we almost certainly, on either side of the Tasman, will have to deal with scenarios like that.
Jacinda Ardern says she knows how important it is for people for the border to Australia to reopen. The Corrections Minister and the Department of Corrections have apologised to 3 women whose treatment at Auckland Women's Prison has been described by a judge as inhumane. One of the women, Mihi Bassett, was not given extra time on her sentence for arson today, with the judge ruling that she had already suffered enough. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
The Minister, Kelvin Davis, has not only apologised but told Corrections to overhaul its maximum security classification of women, the development of management plans for them, and a review of all women's prisons. Corrections Regional Commissioner Lynette Cave says the department must always uphold the highest standards, and she is deeply sorry that for these 3 women, it didn't. From Parliament, ko Charlie Drever, tēnei.
The Race Relations Commissioner says the TV programme Police 10-7 is racist and TVNZ needs to go back to the drawing board. Calls are mounting for the show to be scrapped since Auckland councillor Efeso Collins called it racist, saying it persistently depicts young brown people as brutish. Meng Foon says he refuses to watch it.
It is a biased racist TV programme. It is there to attract viewers. But they do also have a responsibility in acknowledging that there is good work going on and needs to be actually less targeting of Maori Pacific.
Meanwhile, the Police Association wants Meng Foon to retract a comment he made to other media that the police are racist. West Coast tourism operators want an apology from their MP for saying COVID-19 has taught the tourism industry not to be so cocky. Damien O'Connor, who's the Agriculture Minister, made the comment late last week while discussing how dairy had overtaken tourism as the country's top export earner. Rob Jewell, who co-chairs the Glacier Country Tourism Group, is disbelieving.
He is a former tourism minister who obviously knows the industry very, very well. To make that sort of comment is just quite shocking. He was also himself a former tourism operator some years ago, and I would have thought he has a good understanding of the industry.
National's tourism spokesperson Todd McClay says the tone-deaf comment shows Damien O'Connor is out of touch with the devastation tourism businesses are facing. A new tool that tells people where they rank in the queue for the COVID-19 vaccine is now available. It went live on the government's COVID website today. Rachel Thomas reports.
From today, people can fill out a short online questionnaire about their health, where they live and work, and whether they're pregnant. They're then told which of the 4 main vaccination groups they're in and which month they will be eligible for inoculation. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the questionnaire is anonymous and the data is not saved. The tool is being translated into 24 languages, which will start to appear online today. Ko Rachel Thomas, Aho.
It's 4 minutes past 5. The mental toll of keeping her weight down has led to world champion New Zealand rower Zoe McBride's sudden retirement from the sport. The 25-year-old's decision comes just a few months out from the Tokyo Olympics, where she would have been a leading gold medal contender. Lightweight female rowers can't be over 59 kilograms, and McBride says the battle to keep her weight down was taking too much of a toll on her health.
I was so ashamed to talk about it for a really long time, because sometimes when you're in a position like that, it doesn't matter if it's a sport or if it's whatever scenario, like there can be a lot of shame around it and stigma. And I have struggled for a while, and I got to a point where I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore.
Tottenham Hotspur have enjoyed a morale-boosting 2-0 win over Aston Villa to climb to 6th place in English football's Premier League. They'd recently lost to Arsenal and been surprisingly eliminated from the Europa League by Croatian side Dinamo Zagreb. Meanwhile, Leicester City are through to the FA Cup semi-finals for the first time since 1982. They beat Manchester United 3-1 and will now play Southampton for a spot in the final. Chelsea have drawn Premier League leaders Manchester City in the other semi after the Blues beat Sheffield United 2-0. Tokyo Olympic organisers will have to refund 600,000 tickets after banning international spectators for the Games amid public concerns over coronavirus. That's the news.
Sydney's devastating floods break records.
I've never seen it like this before, never.
And I've never seen 100 mil of rain here for a long time.
An Icelandic volcano leaves much to be desired.
We thought we'd have a bigger eruption, but this is kind of a glowing little blob in the middle of nowhere.
And the Earth avoids a close shave with a speedy asteroid.
It will be about 1 million times the Hiroshima bomb. Certainly if it were to hit Europe, it takes out pretty much the whole of Europe.
Listen before it's too late. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland partly cloudy, 1 or 2 light showers are possible. Auckland to the Kapiti coast, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Fine apart from some cloudy areas morning and night. Gisborne mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle. Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington mostly cloudy, a few drizzle patches morning and night but becoming fine tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury mostly cloudy today. Cloud clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine, but low cloud returns south of Christchurch tomorrow night. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland mainly fine, areas of cloud morning and evening. Otago and Southland mainly fine, isolated showers inland tomorrow afternoon and evening. Cloud about coastal Southland spreading to coastal Otago tomorrow night. And Chatham Islands mostly cloudy with the odd light shower possible. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It'll be another 2 weeks until the public will know when a Trans-Tasman bubble will be put in place. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says there are a series of boxes to be ticked before an announcement can be made. Among them, making sure plans are in place in case there's an outbreak here or there and shoring up the contact tracing system. The Prime Minister says she'll make an announcement on the 6th of April about when the bubble will be set up. She says it's important everything is lined up on both sides of the Tasman.
What I want to do, though, is make sure that when we do that, we know we're ready, that we have a plan in place if in the near term we have an outbreak, and we almost certainly, on either side of the Tasman, will have to deal with scenarios like that. We've got to make sure we have a plan in place to deal with the number of people who could either be in New Zealand or Australia at that time.
Why are we still in a place where you're still having to check off some of these things, like getting the airports ready, getting the airlines ready?
Look,
why isn't that working?
Well, actually, no. To be fair to both the airlines and the airports, a significant amount of work has already been done in those areas. What, of course, is different than what we've been planning through the entire time is we now will have to deal with different circumstances in different states, which does add complexity, but it is not insurmountable. What I would say is that there's no other countries in the world who have been working to an elimination strategy who are now trying to maintain that whilst opening up travel between the the two. So we are having to create a brand new rule book. Now, we've done that before, and we're doing it again here, but it does come with complexity, particularly for New Zealand, more so than for Australia.
Justin Tai-Umbers is the Executive Director of the Board of Airline Representatives, which advocates for the aviation industry, and he joins me now. Justin, so a date to announce a date for a bubble. What do you think of that?
Well, hi Lisa. Like everyone, we were hoping for a date today. We were disappointed in that. But I think, look, it is one step forward. At least we now know when we'll know on April 6th. So that is some form of progress.
The Prime Minister there, giving a shopping list of the things that she says need to be shored up. So let's just check one of those off, eh? Are the airlines ready to go?
Yeah, look, I think the Prime Minister had it exactly right. There's been a huge amount of work being done. We've been working on this since at least July last year. So airlines are 95% ready to go. The last 5%, though, for that to be completed, we need a date. So that's taking firm actions that are going to drive costs in terms of calling people back up, getting contracts in place, all of that sort of thing.
So to be clear, you guys are absolutely as ready as you can be until the Prime Minister gives you an actual date.
Yeah, everything that can be done has been done. So I think from a process perspective and looking at all of the procedures that need to be done to keep people safe on flights across the Tasman, that work's been done over months. So we're just waiting to hear from government what the final requirements may be. And you've heard the Prime Minister talk about it at a state perspective. But we've done everything that we can. Once there's a date, then that'll kick in a chain of events in terms of getting, the rubber hitting the road, getting people ready, aircraft ready, rosters, all of that sort of thing.
So basically you're ready?
Yeah, that's right. And there's a certain amount of lead time to get all of that done.
How much, Justin?
Yeah,
how much do you need?
Probably Minister Hipkins had it about right at about 3 weeks, I think. So we'd absolutely like to see that the safe zone is announced in April. So, follow on the 6th.
Am I clear in understanding this, Justin? You don't want to call staff back, or airlines don't want to call staff back, put them on contracts when there's no guarantee that they will need them. So is that the bit you're sort of waiting in the wings before you re-employ people, the aviation industry?
Yeah, that's right. And that's like a lot of businesses up and down the country. So you've got to make a judgment call and decision in terms of when you think it's going to open. And there's unions, there's contracts, there's a lot of complexity to get in place. So you want to be sure about when it's going to happen, because you do start incurring costs at that point. And if you're in a situation where it drags on and you're incurring costs but you're not getting any revenue in, so absolutely it's important this timing's got right.
The Prime Minister's indicated that it's harder to set up the bubble on this side of the Tasman. Is she right? Do you think it is harder from this side?
In that, if you're dealing with individual states, so I think the comment that Australia only has to deal with New Zealand. New Zealand has to deal with a number of individual states. You do see health ministers in the individual states can make calls. So there is a little bit of added complexity there. Having said that, we've been in a situation now where airlines have been running quarantine-free flights into Australia, into Brisbane, into New South Wales. We've learned a lot through that, and I think it's not insurmountable by any means.
Does it change what you do as airlines, the fact that it is looks to be a state-by-state arrangement?
Really only in terms of the operating of the safe zone, in terms of all of the standards that need to be put in place in terms of, passenger separation at airports, green flights versus red flights, wearing masks on board, all of that sort of detail really sits at the federal level. What happens is if there were to be an individual outbreak in a state, it's different states can announce it differently. So,
Justin, your cell phone's dropping out in and out a little bit. So maybe just stand on one leg and sort of twist in a northerly direction, and hopefully we'll get through this. But
hopefully that's better.
Yeah. So one of the other things the Prime Minister raised, she said we need to get some technical issues sorted, and she mentioned transiting passengers. Now you call them red and green lanes, basically. So green, you don't need to quarantine, and red, you've got some other requirements around you. Are you sorted? Are the airlines sorted in terms of transiting passengers?
Yeah, those rules are pretty clear, and as I said, we're already doing that one way. So what that means is essentially if you're hopping on a plane over to Australia on a green flight, you're not going to find yourself sitting next to anyone who's transiting through from another part of the world, and that's what those green flights mean. So it's literally Australian citizens and New Zealand citizens who are flying on those ones. Transit passengers will go on red flights, and what the airlines do is they'll schedule in a number of red and green flights, and that's up to each individual airline, but it provides a pathway through for those transit passengers that are also needing to get across.
Should we passengers expect airfares to cost about the same as they did before COVID once this thing gets off the ground?
Yeah, well, we all hope so. I think there'll certainly be strong competition. There's going to be a heck of a lot of pent-up demand. There is a challenging cost environment for airlines to operate at the moment, and we have seen some costs in Australia, like aviation security, go up. But I think all in all, there'll be some competitive fares out there that people can look forward to.
Just on the wider issue, so, OK, we're talking about a Trans-Tasman bubble here. What do you think the airlines' positions are going to be as borders open up for travel to more far-off destinations? Is it going to be a situation where it's show a vaccination card or we won't carry you?
Yeah, I think in the longer term, that's, IATA, the International Air Transport Association, is putting in place procedures so that you can have a travel pass where you can evidence that you've got a vaccine and pre-departure tests if those are needed. I think longer term, that's probably what we can expect to see, but I think that may be a wee way off. We're obviously in the very early stages of vaccine rollout programs at the moment, so we'll know more about that throughout the year.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Justin Umbers, who's the Executive Director of the Board of Airline Representatives, which advocates for the aviation industry. It is 5:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that. Just to be clear, the Prime Minister has made an announcement that she's announced a date, 6th of April, and on that date she'll make an announcement about the Trans-Tasman bubble. So on the 6th of April we should know what the deal is. Your thoughts on that? Keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Auckland Women's Prison faces a major overhaul of the way it handles inmates after revelations by RNZ about the degrading and inhumane treatment of Mihi Bassett and other women at the prison. Corrections has also issued a rare apology to Bassett over her treatment, which included being pepper sprayed in her cell multiple times, having to lie on the ground to be fed, and being held unlawfully in the prison pound for months. After Bassett's court case finished in Manukau today, Corrections Minister Kelvin Davis has told his department its treatment of women is unacceptable, and he's demanding changes to the culture and practices at Auckland Women's Prison. Investigative reporter Guyon Espiner broke the story last year and was in court today.
Mihi Bassett survived a suicide attempt in Auckland Women's Prison and lived through conditions the judge described as a concerted effort by Corrections to break her spirit. If that was their aim, they failed. And today, Mihi Bassett got the chance to thank the judge for bringing her treatment to light.
Really just wanted to say thank you for digging into this whole situation, because it was pretty gnarly, and I just feel without your concerns, this wouldn't even be happening.
Technically, this was a sentencing. Mihi Bassett was charged with arson after burning prison property in 2019. But what was really on trial was the way Auckland Women's Prison treated her. Justice McNaughton found the prison held Bassett in the pound unlawfully, subjected her to pepper spraying, which went well beyond reasonable force, and made her carry out a humiliating ritual, lying on the ground just to get food.
The measure of a civilised society is how it treats its most vulnerable and disadvantaged citizens, and we judges know from experience that Maori women prisoners are amongst our most vulnerable, disadvantaged and damaged citizens.
The treatment pushed Mihi Bassett to attempt to take her own life in January 2020.
To learn that this serious physical and psychological abuse is occurring in a women's prison is profoundly disturbing. And that it is happening, or that it was happening, here in our own backyard in Manukau, just a few minutes drive from this court, is especially disturbing for a judge who sits here.
Bassett was supported today by her mother, her grandmother and her brother. They say they accept the apology from Corrections, but were appalled to find out just how she'd been treated.
It's disgusting to hear that was taking place, and that's something that she was going through. But now that it's all out in the open, hopefully things can change.
To be honest with you, I've got no words, love. I just didn't think that sort of thing here happened in New Zealand. As I keep saying, my daughter's naughty, but she was sentenced to go to prison, not to go to prison to be punished. And so to find out all this stuff was happening to her, yeah. She's healing, and thank goodness she's strong.
The judge decided that no time would be added to Bassett's sentence for the arson charge. He said the fire was lit in protest at the conditions, was quickly extinguished and posed no serious danger to others.
In short, you have suffered enough.
Criminologist Professor Tracy McIntosh said the fact that Corrections apologised to Mihi Bassett for the way it treated her in prison was a rare victory and provided real hope for change.
We don't get many of these days in these sorts of places. As someone who constantly looks at decarceration strategies, I recognise that an apology is necessary but not sufficient. It's what we do now that makes the difference.
And Corrections will now be forced to make changes. Corrections Minister Kelvin Davis has a new report from the Prison Inspectorate showing serious failings at Auckland Women's Prison. He wants a detailed plan for how the prison will improve its treatment of women inmates and an urgent review of all women's prisons. Mihi Bassett is serving 10 years for her role in a violent home invasion. Corrections said in court that she had been violent or threatened violence to prison staff 65 times and had 42 disciplinary hearings. But the judge saw strong and positive elements in her character too.
You are resilient, you are a survivor. So despite everything that's happened to you in prison, and despite everything that's happened to you in your life before that, and despite the crimes you have committed, underneath all of that, there is a good person. You deserve a better life than this. So when you finish your sentence, look for the good in other people, reconnect with your whānau.
Bassett is now in Arohata Prison in Wellington, which she said was a far safer environment for her than Auckland Women's Prison. Bassett said she'd now enrolled in prison rehabilitation programs and hoped to be out in 2 years to help look after her nan. For Checkpoint, ko Guy and Espinatino.
Lynette Cave is Corrections Northern Regional Commissioner and joins me now. Good evening, Commissioner. So, a litany of failings, abuse, inhumane treatment. What has Corrections got to say for itself?
Well, e mihi ana ki te kaupapa e whakahuihui ni I a tātou. Good evening. Yes, I would like to firstly say we have met with the 3 women involved. I've met with them personally and offered a heartfelt apology, and I'm deeply sorry that for these women we must be better. In this case, we weren't.
So how did it get this bad?
Well, let's remember that some of this was historical, so started in February 2019 through to early 2020.
That's incredibly recent, Commissioner. So how many prison officers would have dealt with Mihi Bassett during the time she was in segregation? You know, just give me a ballpark. How many prison officers?
There would have been a number of prison officers.
So more than 10?
Yes, that would be correct.
OK, so while she's made to lie on her stomach to get food, she's made to hand over her knickers before she can get clean ones, she's on the verge of attempting to kill herself, and what, not a single one of those people notices or raises the alarm about the treatment she's receiving?
Well, I think obviously, you know, there was some concerns raised and that went through the management plans, but we are talking about a wider systemic issue here, and, you know, we aren't making excuses. We are saying we are really sorry for the way that they were treated, and that's all of us. That's not one individual. That is the whole of Arapotama and that systemic approach that in this case, you know, we didn't follow our own policies and procedures and we let ourselves down, and we are really deeply sorry for that.
But people execute policy, right, on an everyday basis. So people engaged in this inhumane treatment of these women, individuals, why did no one seriously raise the alarm here. Do you have a culture problem among your corrections officers?
No, and let's remember that...
How can you say that, Commissioner?
360 approximately wahine at Auckland Women's. These were 3 wahine that I absolutely accept. We didn't do right by them, but actually for many wahine that experience coming through Auckland Women, and we're absolutely transparent with that and open our doors to anyone who wants to come in. There is some really terrific mahi that happens on site. And
okay, I'm sure there is, Commissioner, but I want to address what went wrong here. So if we could stay on topic, why can you say that you don't think there is a cultural problem with your officers here, when clearly you've said to me at least 10 plus officers dealt with Mihi Bassett and the women here, yet what the judge calls physical and psychological abuse was allowed to happen? How could it happen?
Well, I think at that time, as I said, we were managing some really complex, difficult, challenging behaviour. Yes, there was over 10 corrections officers involved. At the time, they were sort of deep in the system, thinking what they were potentially doing was the right thing to do. But in hindsight,
what do you mean deep in the system?
When we look back at what happened, it was wrong, and we should have seen that, and we should have done better.
What do you mean deep in the system? They were deep in the system.
Well, I think in terms of being in the system, maybe they felt, powerless in terms of changing, the set way that we were managing those wahine. But obviously, and now that we have acknowledged that, we are absolutely determined that this will never happen again.
Or did they actually feel that was how you treat prisoners?
I would not say that. For, as I said earlier, we've got some really good correction staff that work in incredibly difficult, complex situations.
Is it time to clean house, Commissioner? Are any of these people losing their jobs, or are they all still working there?
Well, our focus at the moment is on the 3 women. So as I said last week, I met with them and offered them an apology. We want to work with those wahine moving forward. We want them to be part of our system, so actually to hear their voice and how we can make changes, long-lasting changes that will be sustained.
So has anyone been disciplined over the way Mihi Bassett was treated?
As I said, at this point in time, our focus is on those women and making sure that we go
This
through
is about
a
public
proper
accountability,
redress.
Commissioner. So, really simple question. Has anyone been disciplined over the treatment of Mihi Bassett or any of the women mentioned in this case? Yes or no?
That's not appropriate at this point in time, but no.
Nobody has been disciplined?
As I said, we are focusing on the women and our care to make sure that they are supported in their journey.
Why didn't you present any of these corrections officers in court when the court asked to hear evidence from you? Why weren't officers made available to the court?
The reason for that is because obviously it was an active case before the court. We were very careful that we didn't want to prejudice any court proceedings. We weren't actually party to the proceedings. The woman involved was appearing on a charge. We were also waiting on the findings from the inspectorate report as well. So there was, we didn't want to interfere in terms of a legal proceeding.
Can you appreciate how that might look like your department was trying to hide here?
As I said before, we have nothing to hide. We welcome, anyone onto our site, Amnesty, help other organisations. We realise that it's a complex business and we can't do this alone. So, our doors are open. We have nothing to hide.
Have you read Judge McNaughton's earlier ruling around the treatment of Mihi Bassett?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So he has said the use of force in these incidents was excessive. And some distance beyond what was reasonably necessary. That's talking about pepper spraying her. Mm-hmm. Excessive, degrading and fundamentally inhumane treatment regarding the food rituals which she was made to perform. Nothing short of cruel in respect of transferring a prisoner to a cell where she had witnessed someone trying to kill herself. Can you explain how any of that behaviour fits with the Hokairangi policy?
As I said, I'm really disappointed. Our Hokairangi principles are about humanising and healing and manaaki and whānau and all of those values that in this particular instance for these wahine, we didn't live out those values. So, I personally talked to all 3 and apologised for that.
So would you accept that the behaviours exhibited in the treatment of Mihi Bassett are completely in opposition to what is expected under the hokairangi policy?
I would agree with that, yes.
So why is it that nobody spoke up at the time?
I think, as I said before, the inspectorate found that there was insufficient experience or expertise brought to bear, and, you know, maybe people felt like they didn't have a voice to speak up.
Why do they feel like they haven't got a voice to speak up?
Well, I think, you know, we need to make sure that moving forward that everyone has a voice, including the women in our care.
Is there a culture where people are made to believe they should look the other way and keep on doing things the way they've been done for ages?
Not at all. In fact, you know, since 2019, early 2020, we have put in many different initiatives in place to ensure that people can speak up, that we have an independent...
But that's not the case, is it, Commissioner? And I'm sorry to keep harking back to this, but that's simply not the case because, as we've discussed, nobody spoke up. Nobody said this is inhumane treatment of this prisoner. Nobody raised the alarm. So, we get back to the same question. What is wrong with the culture in this prison and potentially others among corrections officers?
Well, just going back to what I said before, I do think we need to look at an overhaul of, for instance, the maximum security classification for women, a closer look at also like the development management plans for women, and that goes not just across Auckland Women's, but across all of the women's estate. And the way we manage women has to be different to how the male estate is managed. So, you know, this could be, you know, the springboard and the platform that actually we relook at all of our policies and processes for women that are in custody.
Your Deputy Prison Director, Alison Fowley, was oblivious to how segregation orders work under the Corrections Act. She was unaware that they expire after 14 days unless the CEO directs them to be extended. She was unaware that they expire after 3 months unless a judge orders their continuation, right? So, Deputy Prison Director, oblivious to the fact that this woman was being held illegally, is that incompetence?
Look, I don't want to single out individuals today. She was in an acting capacity. We have had a number of different senior leaders that have come through Auckland Women's. I am pleased to say that we have a permanent Auckland Prison Director, and we've also now got a very experienced Deputy Prison Director who, on a daily basis, goes down to the units and talks directly to the women involved, so they have a direct line to really senior leadership in the region. But
your prison was acting outside of the law on multiple occasions, yes?
We didn't follow our own processes.
So you were acting outside of the law. You're governed by the Corrections Act. Were you acting outside of the law on multiple occasions?
Well, we weren't in accordance with the Corrections Act.
So you're acting outside of the law?
As I said, we weren't in accordance with the Corrections Act, and that will be a conversation that, you know, can ensue at a later date.
What's your liability here in terms of compensation? Has any been paid?
That is a process that we will work through with the women involved. Obviously, the very first thing, the most important thing, was to apologise, and then we will do a formal apology, offer counselling support, and as part of that, there will be a financial redress.
Right, so can you give us a ballpark about how much this is going to cost you?
Not at this point in time.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Lynette Cave, who is Corrections Northern Regional Commissioner. Auckland's Mayor has delivered a damning letter demanding answers from Ports of Auckland bosses. Amid revelations, there have been 4 stop work injuries over the last 6 months. The ports have faced ongoing safety issues as well as import delays over the past year. The ports were due to appear before Auckland Council for a scheduled committee meeting open to the public, but that's now being held behind closed doors to protect commercial sensitivity. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person joins me now. Nita, tell us about this letter.
This letter was written by Mayor Phil Goff last Monday, the 15th of March, and it's written to Bill Osborne, the chair of the Ports of Auckland, laying out 4 major concerns, basically health and safety, responsiveness, accountability and performance. And he starts with health and safety, and he's obviously very frustrated that he has yet to see a copy of that independent report which was commissioned by the council into safety at the Ports of Auckland. So he's telling them to hurry up with that. Secondly was what the Mayor describes as a reluctance to appear before councillors to answer questions about the Port's performance at a council-controlled committee meeting. Thirdly, he describes a reluctance to take on board recommendations and requirements around reviewing their automation projects, which we've heard so much about, those automation projects down at the port. And Phil Goff also describes a cursory response around his requirements for there to be a plan in terms of Maori outcomes. Lastly, there was a lack of responsiveness to one councillor who asked for some information from the ports, waited 6 weeks only to then be told commercially sensitive and the information wouldn't be available. So those concerns there.
So obviously Phil Goff clearly not happy with the ports. Have they responded in any way to the letter?
Yeah, they wrote back the next day. Bill Osborne, the chair there, responded addressing each of those points. We've seen a copy of that. He starts with the safety report, Chasm's the report. Those are the people who've commissioned it. He says that that is being taken seriously. They're getting a lot of feedback on it at the moment now. It was discussed on Friday and it will be out imminently. Next, a review of the automation project. He says there's always reviews done of major capex things, and that's being done by KPMG. Hit back around claims around Maori outcomes, said that that wasn't for the Ports of Auckland to prescribe, that was for tangata whenua. And as for a lack of information supplied to the councillor, he said that management has reconfirmed it wasn't appropriate for ports to provide that, and that there are formal pathways available for information sharing.
So given the kind of apparent tension between the council and the ports, what is happening with tomorrow's meeting?
So tomorrow's meeting is a council-controlled organisation committee meeting. Sounds a bit of a mouthful, but basically this is when council-controlled organisations front up for questions about councillors. It's done in the public. We can all see media there too to understand what it is that is being discussed and wants to know. So that was scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m, but Ports of Auckland are now going to have that meeting behind closed doors, privately. I've been told that they were reluctant to appear in public, and obviously that was concerns Phil Goff has as well. Not many councillors were keen to discuss this today, but I did have a discussion with Councillor Chris Darby, who said basically they've agreed to this being behind closed doors because councillors are fed up with this lack of information from the ports. So they want to take away any excuses that the ports have in terms of not supplying information and being full and frank. So they want a no-holds-barred conversation. They don't want, any claims around commercial sensitivity to come out. And that's why it'll be private tomorrow. And he said, to quote, they're going to be grilled like they've never been grilled before.
Thanks, Nita. Nita Blake-Person there on the meeting that's happening tomorrow between Auckland Council and Ports of Auckland. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the Sky Path hits the skids, angering cycling advocates wanting to cross the Harbour Bridge with pedal power. Despite lockdowns and job losses, the pokies have still got a belly full, and the Race Relations Commissioner calls Police 10-7 racist. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can get in touch via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email. checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is the address. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says certain conditions have to be met before the Trans-Tasman bubble can go ahead. There will be an announcement on April the 6th about when the border with Australia will reopen. Ms Ardern says there must be measures in place if COVID cases occur in Australia, and contact tracing for visitors must be effective. The Corrections Minister is demanding an urgent review of all women's prisons. Kelvin Davis also wants an overhaul of the maximum security classification for women. The Minister and his department have apologised to 3 women for their treatment in Auckland Women's Prison. Today, Judge David McNaughton ruled that Mickey Bassett, who was appearing on arson charges, should not have any extra time added to her sentence because she had suffered enough in prison. A cycling group says its confidence in the transport agency Waka Kotahi is shaken by the news that the long-awaited walking and cycling path across the Auckland Harbour Bridge has struck technical issues. The chairperson of Bike Auckland, Barb Cuthbert, says just 2 years ago the agency was confident it could build the path. A West Coast tourism operator believes comments by the Agriculture Minister and local MP will cause more hurt to already struggling communities. Damien O'Connor has said that COVID-19 has taught the tourism industry not to be so cocky. Glacier Country Tourism Group co-chair Rob Jewell says he is shocked and disappointed by the remarks. The jury in the month-long trial of a prominent businessman accused of indecent assault has not reached a verdict and has been sent home for the night. The high-profile businessman has been charged with 3 counts of indecently assaulting 3 different men during the last 20 years. He also faces two charges of trying to bribe one of the complainants to drop his allegation. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen taku ingoa. It's time now for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, you have said here that the financial generation gap appears to be widening.
Yeah, I'm sure
people... Is this
people...
through housing or something else?
It's all connected, isn't it? But I'm sure people listening to this between the age of 18 to 29 won't find this as some major revelation. But young people are becoming increasingly more pessimistic about their financial futures when compared to their older counterparts. And that's one of the findings to come from the Westpac Bank's Consumer Confidence Survey. Now, we get these surveys from time to time, quite regularly, really. The ANZ Bank, they release theirs on a monthly basis. Westpac, they drop theirs on a quarterly basis. And what this latest survey shows is that consumer sentiment has slightly eased over the 3 months to March. It follows that huge rebound we saw in the December quarter, and it continues to languish below its historical average. And the view of the bank's senior economist, Satish Ranchod, is that while the economy is getting back on a firm footing following the lockdowns we saw last year, the recovery has been uneven. We're now wrestling with lower activity in tourism-related sectors. People who work in those sectors have probably been the most affected by job losses. And interestingly, while this is the case, the number of people who say they are worse off fell slightly, and the number of people who expect to be better off in a year's time increased slightly. But a clear divide is really emerging along these generational lines, because it's older people who tend to be, the most likely to own houses. More of their wealth is tied up in property. And with these rising house prices that we're seeing month on month, these people's wealth is increasing on paper. And what they're saying in the data is that they're the most bullish. They have the biggest appetite when it comes to go out and spend. While younger people, they do not tend to own property as much. They aren't benefiting from these gains month on month. And they also tend to be hired more in industries like hospitality and tourism that have been really battered by COVID-19. So that goes some way to explain where this pessimism is coming from. And Westpac says that left unchecked, the social and economic implications of this widening gap can be quite disastrous. And it raises the question about whether really there is a need for targeted stimulus from the government to help address these issues, because it's clear that what the Reserve Bank is doing in terms of lower interest rates, the cheap price of money, cheap price of credit rather, it isn't really benefiting everyone.
Okay, let's talk about earnings results, because there's some from retailers this week.
Yeah, we're going
Which
to get
ones?
a look at the half-year results from the likes of Kathmandu, the Warehouse Group and Hallenstein's Glassons. And all their earnings are expected to come in over and above what we saw last year, and that's really because they've benefited from this big spending boom as we came out of last year's lockdown. And the head of private wealth research at Craig's Investment Partners, Mark Lister, he reckons the Warehouse is going to be the pick of the bunch. The company has been on a bit of a tear recently. It's updated its profit guidance 3 times in as many months. The company's been really buoyed by the fact of strong trading over the Christmas period. It announced it was going to repay the wage subsidy. They wouldn't have said that if they weren't in a strong financial position. And they also declared that they were going to be paying a special interim dividend to its shareholders, a further reflection of how trading has been progressing. Hallenstein Glassons, on the other hand, there is result is expected to be pretty good. The signal to the market that sales have come in about 13% over and above last year. And Kathmandu, well, their result is expected to be solid. A lot of its business is focused on overseas, especially the likes of the Rip Curl brand, which it acquired in the past 12 months. So, and if you've also got to take into account what they actually sell, outdoor equipment, it's quite popular if you're travelling overseas, but people aren't doing much of that recently. There's been lots of New Zealanders who are out camping, glamping and tramping. So you can see there's demand, within New Zealand's borders for some of their sort of camping equipment, but it's not unable to say if that really is the case in other countries around the world who haven't sort of been out of lockdown as much as we have. I guess the really interesting thing for people who do invest, who do pay attention to this sort of thing, is going to be the comments that come in the company's outlook section, because as I mentioned, we've seen really strong sales over this past 6-month period, but the real question is, will it be sustained from here? Can they continue to grow? We've had this flat consumer confidence survey. Do they expect demand to begin to wane over the next 6 months? And also there's a number of practicalities that we'll have to get some answers on, and which is, retailers, of course, they deal with issues around supply chains. What are their inventory levels looking like? How are they managing these ongoing effects? There'll be a lot to look forward to in the coming days.
Let's have a quick gallop around the market numbers.
The NZX is down about 186 points to 12,329. The dollar is at 71.6 US cents, 92.6 Australian. And because we haven't spoken about it in a while, Bitcoin, a single Bitcoin is worth about 81,000 New Zealand dollars.
81,000. Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton there with our business update. The brakes might be on the long-awaited walking and cycling path across the Auckland Harbour Bridge because of fundamental technical issues. It's caught the ire of Bike Auckland, who says it doubts the Transport Agency's ability to land the project. Waka Kotahi, which is in charge of the Sky Path, won't divulge details of the technical issue, only saying more information will be revealed when it's available. Chin Yul reports.
After years of discussion, a new plan for what is popularly known as the Sky Path, a shared path over the Auckland Harbour Bridge, was announced in 2019. The design will provide a 5-metre wide path flanking the southbound traffic side, attached to the bridge piers. The Transport Agency said that construction was expected to start this year, but nothing much has happened apart from acquiring a few houses adjacent to where part of the pathway is going to be. Bike Auckland's chairperson, Bob Cuthbert, told RNZ the plan is likely not going ahead, as she was made aware of some fundamental technical issues. RNZ understands there are problems with the bridge piers. She says the public deserves more accountability.
That was 2019. It's now 2021. 2 years later, we're hearing they can't do it. What I do want to say is that this has completely shaken any confidence I had in Waka Kotahi.
Ms Cuthbert says the city is developing fast, with lots of apartments being built in the North Shore, and ferries can't cope with the demand going south into the city centre. She says the only option is converting one of the existing lanes to a dedicated cycling and pedestrian path.
We've been driven to this solution because Waka Kotahi have let Auckland down so badly. This was never our first solution. We asked them formally in writing and they haven't been able to answer. They say they are considering it, but there's no answer.
It is a project many Aucklanders have been looking forward to for a long time. If it is not going ahead as originally planned, it will cause some frustration.
It's disappointing because it would be a good option for me and a lot of people, I think, linking up the North Shore for cyclists, taking cars off the road. So, yeah, I think it would have been a great thing to go ahead.
I think it would connect a lot of the community over there to here. It's also great for kids and for exercise and for commuting. So, yeah, it's pretty disappointing.
I think it should happen just as soon as possible, because that will reduce a lot of all the cars coming over the bridge. A lot of people would prefer to cycle to work. It's a no-brainer, really.
A few houses on Princess Street near the Harbour Bridge have been acquired, or they are in the process of being acquired by the Transport Agency to give way to a ramp for the proposed Sky Path. An owner says there has been scant communication about what is going on. We've reversed his words.
We don't know yet because we haven't been told anything, whether they're going to proceed with it in some other form or not. We have no idea.
He says he doesn't understand why the Transport Agency acquired the houses people have lived in for decades without having a clear practical plan first.
The disruption and the stress. We farewelled our neighbours the other day and there were lots of tears. And you know, the stress that people have been under is unbelievable for something that may never happen.
Waka Kotahi Transport Agency General Manager Transport Services Brett Glidden says in a statement that a walking and cycling connection over the Waitemata Harbour is a priority for the government. He says an alliance has been appointed to deliver the project and is working on examining the design to ensure that the connection is fit for purpose. He says more information on the revised program will be provided when this work is complete. The agency declined to comment when asked whether or not the current design is still an option. Motahotaka o te ahiahi nei ko Chanleo tēnei.
It's 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Waitangi Tribunal is being told the government needs to apologise for failing to ensure Maori have adequate housing. The hearing into how the Crown has perpetuated Maori homelessness is underway at Te Puia Marae in Mangere. The marae has opened its doors to hundreds of homeless whānau over the last 5 years and found them a place to live. Te Orewa Rolleston reports.
Mary Moike Te Pure did everything in her power to put a roof over her head. The then lecturer in early childhood education and mother of 3 lost her home after her marriage broke down. Despite owning the house, she couldn't access the money because of an ongoing court battle over the property. Penniless and with nowhere to go, she had to sleep in a van with her 3 tamariki, who were all under 10.
It was very uncomfortable and scary sleeping in our van. One night as we slept, I woke because a woman knocked on the window for a cigarette. I drove away. Another night we were all woken by a group of youths. They'd started fighting and one of them was held up against our van and being threatened.
She couldn't find any rooms at safe houses because they were all full or didn't cater for children. She was also rejected from 40 private rentals. She then went to the Ministry of Social Development for help.
But I was told that I did not fit their criteria for any assistance. This was due to the fact that I had employment and I and my children were not considered to be sufficiently destitute to warrant any assistance. Despite that categorisation, we were in fact broke.
It is this response from the ministry, which Te Puia Marae Chair Huri Moana Dennis says is part of the problem.
There is no human face, patience and empathy. The absence of Māori strategies and supporting Māori structures and initiatives only allow and encourage agency staff to behave poorly to homeless whānau in urgent need of support.
Through its Manaaki Tangata Erua Transitional Housing Program, Te Puia Marae has been providing temporary accommodation and finding houses for those in need since 2016. It identifies whānau living in cars and gives them a bed and kai. The model includes having a ministry official who works on site to connect whānau with the services they need and to help them find a more permanent solution. Huri Moana Dennis says it's a blueprint for how the government should be dealing with homelessness and is underpinned by tikanga Māori.
And at the moment we can't see any natural fit. In particular, so when MSD looks after the social housing waitlist and the other one looks after the available stock, the two don't talk. So we're saying no, that needs to change, and here at the Marae we have the ability to do that.
But Marae Treasurer Jennifer Iris Georgina Nuku says programs like Manaaki Tangata don't get adequately funded. Government contracts are often a set amount for each whānau, regardless of how big the family is.
The service delivery fee covers wages and not much else. Often we staff work longer than our contracted hours in order to get the job done. We don't get paid for any overtime.
Huri Moana Dennis wants to see one body overseeing whānau housing services, which would include social, transitional and papakainga. He also wants a formal apology from the Crown for ignoring Māori homelessness and failing to enact legislation and policy to change it. The hearing is set down for the rest of the week. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko te Aotearoa Rolleston tēnei.
TVNZ is being told it should scrap the reality show Police 10-7 because it's guilty of racist stereotyping. The Race Relations Commissioner Meng Foon says the show is biased and racist. Accusations the program makers categorically deny. Hamish Cardwell has the story.
Auckland councillor Efeso Collins has hit out at Police 10-7, saying it depicts Maori and Pacifica men as brutish. He says a recent promo for the show, which has run for 28 seasons, was edited to prominently show young brown people, and he wants it canned. Auckland University of Technology Communications lecturer Richard Pamatato says the show typically focuses on low-level crime instead of white-collar offending. He says Pākehā New Zealand is having its worst prejudices confirmed.
It's brown people, it's young brown people, it's Maori and it's Pacific, and they're doing something that is easy-picking crime. And what Police 10-7 doesn't do is look at corporate white-collar crime.
Mr Pamatato says the show points the finger at a specific part of New Zealand's population.
It's very damaging for young people who might be Maori or Pacific or not Pākehā. And so, once again, they are made to feel bad. Their identity is being challenged by this program that goes out on majority media Television New Zealand.
The Race Relations Commissioner Meng Foon says Police 10-7 is a biased, racist TV show. He says as the national television broadcaster, the onus is on TVNZ to be accurately and responsibly framing the way crime is portrayed in this country.
Television New Zealand needs to go back to the drawing board and have a reset. And there is definitely unconscious bias from various mediums of media before, and television New Zealand is no different.
Ella Henry, Associate Professor in the Business School at Auckland University of Technology, has taught Māori development for decades. She says Black Lives Matter has put the focus on the way the media frames crime, and there's been fallout.
Only recently we've had John Banks removed from the air because of, what he would consider free speech and what others consider to be hate speech. So the spotlight is increasingly on the kind of media and news that is being produced that might in any way be seen to be demonising people of colour.
Professor Henry says Police 10-7's producers decide what the audience sees.
The difficulty about reality TV is that reality is constructed by the producers. So it is very much a producer's decision as to which crimes. We know that Māori are more likely to be stopped. We know that Māori are more likely to go to jail for the same crimes that white people get off on. So the statistics around reality are somewhat spurious.
She says if even the US can get rid of the TV show Cops, then it can be done here. Police 10-7 does not receive any public funding. The production company Screen Time makes the show, and Chief Executive Philly DeLacy emphatically denies accusations of racist framing. She says her team works incredibly hard to carefully and accurately show what the police are doing without any racial assumptions.
We're trying to portray an accurate portrayal of what the police are doing out in the streets. So as the police evolve, so does the show. You compare the show now to 20 years ago and the way that the police were policing 20 years ago, the show is, what they're doing, and then therefore what we're depicting is fundamentally different.
She says Police 10-7 is nothing like the US show Cops, and there is a reason why it has endured for 2 decades.
It performs an incredibly important function for the police and for the community. We feature serious crime cases every week and numerous people who are wanted for serious crimes that have an incredible resolution rate because of the help of the public.
TVNZ said in a statement it is listening to the feedback, but does not have any comment to make today. The police say all cases are selected based on the seriousness of the crime and the risk to the public, and the contract with Screen Time is due for renewal at the end of the year. The Police Association says Meng Foon's assertion on other media that the police are racist should be retracted. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell tēnei.
More than 18,000 people have so far been evacuated in parts of Sydney after massive rainstorms caused some of the worst flooding in 60 years. The ABC's Catherine Gregory has been speaking to some of those affected.
Laurie Argue is a stockman just outside of Kempsey on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. His farm sits alongside the swollen Belmore River.
It's a bit of a nervous wait just with the forecast and the weather and all the rain that's still coming.
Farmers like Laurie Argue say they feel helpless.
The water's coming up quite quickly here this morning.
And so where are you right now as you're talking to me?
I'm just fed my horses here in my front yard on the mound. I'm just standing on my veranda looking at the river go past.
And what does the river look like?
It's quite high. It's flowing past. We've been watching round bales and different items float past all morning. It's currently bursted the banks just up the road with our neighbour, and it's flowing quite quickly out into the paddocks.
Mr. Argue's been hurriedly moving cattle and horses to higher ground where they should be safe for now.
There is people still with cattle, on the lower river there. I've never quite seen rain like it and come so quick. A lot of farmers will find it tough to try and get their winter crops in just being so wet. And we're sort of at the wrong end of the season, so now we're going to get the colder weather, which will delay growth.
Kempsey has seen some of the heaviest rainfall in New South Wales, almost 200 millimetres since yesterday morning. Further north in Nambucca Heads, heavy rains have also caused havoc.
I have never experienced such rain in my life. Ever.
Local resident Teresa Amaloglu says the deluge came suddenly and unexpectedly.
I heard what I thought was a thunderclap. It was an explosion right above the house. I saw that the whole of the left side of our garden was covered in rubble. Huge tree crashed onto the deck. Water pouring down like a waterfall. Apparently another house had a landslide right through the middle of it.
Mrs. Amaloglu only bought the property several months ago after making a sea change from Sydney. But she says she knew the risks, particularly of the landslides.
The hill behind us with the rainforest is become very unstable with all this rain. And the big fear is one of those trees might come crashing down on the house.
Torrential rain is also causing chaos, including landslides in the Gold Coast hinterland.
And that report was from Catherine Gregory in Sydney. Some feedback on our interview with Lynette Cave, the Northern Regional Commissioner for Corrections. Mark says, what a mess, and my taxpayer payer dollars keep these people in a job. Another one says, I understand you don't want to state anything that may have legal consequences, but evading clear yes or no questions and things that have been found by the court is just ridiculous, this person says. Outside the Act, so illegal. Just be honest.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata at the NA. New Zealanders will have to wait more than a fortnight to find out when a travel bubble will be opened with Australia. The government will announce the start date on April 6th once Cabinet satisfied certain conditions have been met. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Officials initially held talks about a country-to-country bubble, but since Australia backed out in February, ministers have been working on a state-by-state arrangement. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says conditions include a robust framework for when cases arise in Australia, effective contact tracing for visitors, and ensuring airports and airlines are ready. She says other aspects, such as how New Zealand would handle a third country entering into a bubble with Australia, also have to be considered. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The Corrections Minister says corrections must change the way female inmates are treated. Judge David McNaughton found last month that Mihi Bassett and 2 other inmates had been treated inhumanely in Auckland's women's prison. At Bassett's sentencing today, he said she had suffered enough and would not get extra time on her sentence for arson at the prison in 2019. Kelvin Davis has written to Corrections Chief Executive Jeremy Lightfoot demanding a review of all women's prisons.
The system has basically been designed around managing men, and I just don't think in this day and age, and it's probably never been appropriate, that women and their needs have been treated as if they were men.
Corrections has admitted it was acting outside the law in its treatment of the 3 women. The Australian government is preparing to send defence personnel to flood-hit parts of Sydney. At least 18,000 people have been evacuated since heavy rain caused the worst flooding in some areas in 60 years. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says the federal government stands ready to help.
We're expecting a formal request from New South Wales for ADF support today is our expectation. We understand that this is likely to be for recovery support and clean-up operations, including personnel, vehicles and machinery, and the Premier and I were discussing that over the weekend.
More rain is expected over the next couple of days. The head of the Catholic Church in New Zealand says it's ashamed and saddened by cases of abuse. In an opening statement to the inquiry into abuse in care this afternoon, Cardinal John Dew said he hopes it will result in a better church.
And that as a church, this disgrace of abuse will be addressed, will cease, and that our church will always be a church that gives life and hope. That's our mission as a church.
Cardinal Dew says the church still has much to learn. The Royal Commission says a preliminary figure for the number of abuse cases associated with the Catholic Church in this country is 1,100. The jury in the month-long trial of a prominent businessman accused of indecent assault has not reached a verdict and has been sent home for the night. Jordan Bond reports.
The high-profile businessman is up on 3 charges of indecently assaulting 3 different men during the last 20 years. He also faces 2 charges of trying to bribe one of the complainants to drop his allegation. The defence says the stories are all made up and the men are trying to bring the businessman down. The jury started deliberating about 11:30 this morning, but by 5 this afternoon they hadn't reached a verdict. This is Jordan Bond.
An advisor to Donald Trump says the former president will soon return to social media with his own platform. Jagruti Dave has more.
Donald Trump will make his social media comeback in about 2 or 3 months, according to his advisor, Jason Miller. He told Fox News that the former president would be creating his own platform, which will completely redefine the game and draw in tens of millions of users. In a move which divided opinion, a number of social media sites suspended the former commander-in-chief from their platforms after January's deadly riots at the US Capitol.
Jagruti Dave reporting from Washington. It's 4 minutes past 6. The mental toll of controlling her weight has contributed to the shock retirement from rowing of world champion New Zealander Zoe McBride. The 25-year-old would have been a leading gold medal contender at the Tokyo Olympics, but lightweight female rowers can't be over 59 kilograms, and she says trying to achieve that was taking too much of a toll on her health. Consistency isn't something top-flight Queenstown skier Alice Robinson has been known for, but she believes her win in the final World Cup event of the year shows she's making progress. The 19-year-old finished what had been a relatively disappointing World Cup season by winning the final giant slalom competition of the season in Switzerland. Robinson says she's being an all-or-nothing skier means she's often failed to finish races.
The past 2 years that I've wanted to be a lot more consistent, and that continues, and I'm just going to keep building each year to be able to produce the level of skiing that I had today every race.
Meanwhile, newly crowned world champion Nico Porteous has finished third in the men's half-pipe at the Free Ski World Cup in Colorado. The Australian Rugby League player Jared Hayne has been found guilty of sexually assaulting a woman on the night of the 2018 NRL Grand Final. It took the District Court jury 3 days to find him guilty of 2 alternate counts of sexual assault without the circumstances of aggravation by inflicting actual bodily harm. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Auckland University Professor Deirdre Brown, specialist in Maori architectural history and design, and becoming a Fellow of the Academy of the Royal Society. Ian Huffer asks if China's film industry still needs Hollywood. Or is it the other way around these days? And this week's sportscaster Shannon Byrne is on the line from Darwin, Australia, where they are recovering after the weekend's footy finals. We're talking Aussie rules here. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, partly cloudy, 1 or 2 light showers possible. Auckland to the Kapiti coast, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Fine apart from some cloudy areas morning and night. For Gisborne, mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle. Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, mostly cloudy. A few drizzle patches morning and night, but becoming fine tomorrow afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly cloudy today. Cloud clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. fine, but low cloud returns south of Christchurch tomorrow night. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland mainly fine, areas of cloud morning and evening. Otago and Southland mainly fine, isolated showers inland tomorrow afternoon and evening. Cloud about coastal Southland spreading to coastal Otago tomorrow evening. Chatham Islands mostly cloudy with the odd light shower possible. RNZ National at 6:07.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Corrections has admitted it could be in for a hefty compensation bill over the treatment of women in its custody. Minister Kelvin Davis has ordered an urgent overhaul and review of women's prisons following the sentencing of Mihi Bassett for an arson at Auckland Regional Women's Prison in 2019. Her treatment alongside 3 other inmates has been described as inhumane by a district court judge. The judge didn't add any extra time to her sentence, ruling that she'd already suffered enough. The Chief Prison Inspector has investigated and Mr Davis is not happy with what he's read. Both he and the Department of Corrections have apologised to the women.
There was a systemic breakdown. I just believe that the management of the woman was unacceptable, it was inappropriate, and that they were let down. Their needs weren't being met. There had to come a time when people just took a step back and said, the way we are managing these women is not working. What can we do differently? What can we do better? And that never happened.
The Minister's told Corrections he wants immediate changes. That includes an overhaul of its maximum security classification of women, the development of management plans for them and a review of all women's prisons. Additional training for frontline custodial staff with a focus on use of force, segregation, use of cells and searches and management of difficult situations. An external team will also review the complaints process. Kelvin Davis says it's important the management of women is appropriate to women.
The system has basically been designed around managing men, and I just don't think in this day and age, and it's probably never been appropriate, that women and their needs have been treated as if they were men.
He says Corrections needs to make an amends with the women involved.
You know, an apology is one thing we said, access to counselling, settlement of some sort, but I also think their ability to engage in the changes that will be needed for them to have input into what we need to do differently and better to meet the needs of women. I think that's also an important part of making amends to them.
Meanwhile, Corrections Regional Commissioner Lynette Cave says the department must always uphold the highest standards, and she is deeply sorry that for these 3 women it did not. The trial of 2 men charged over the Red Fox Tavern shooting and robbery more than 30 years ago is drawing to a close, and the Crown says a web of circumstantial evidence points to them being responsible. Father of 2, Chris Bush, was gunned down at the pub in Maramarua in October 1987, and the offenders fled with tens of thousands of dollars in cash, coins and cheques. Mark Hogarth and another man with name suppression are charged with murder and aggravated robbery, but deny any involvement in the crime and say the police arrested the wrong men. Our reporter Sarah Robson has been covering the case in the High Court in Auckland and filed this story.
Who were the 2 heavily disguised offenders who burst into the Red Fox Tavern just before midnight, the Saturday of Labour weekend 1987? Crown prosecutor Natalie Walker told the jury that's the key issue.
Who was the noticeably shorter gunman? And who was the taller, heavier man with the bat?
The Crown argues the unnamed defendant, armed with a gun, shot and killed Chris Bush. Mark Hogarth was his accomplice. Carrying a bat, he helped subdue the other bar staff and stole the money. Natalie Walker says the case against the 2 men is largely circumstantial.
As is not uncommon in criminal trials, the Crown case is not built on direct evidence that the defendants were responsible, as might be the case today if there happened to be CCTV evidence. Instead, the Crown case relies on a combination of circumstances from which the Crown says you can infer that the defendants were responsible.
During the trial, the jury heard the unnamed man was jailed for the aggravated robbery of a tavern in Auckland in the early 1980s. But Natalie Walker said that experience did not put him off planning another. She pointed to the evidence of a witness who had been in prison with him.
told Mr Dumbia that he had another job lined up outside of Auckland, somewhere. Probably a pub, because pubs were popular, big cash flows, easier than banks.
Natalie Walker says many details of the planning and execution of the robbery would only ever be known to the offenders.
However, as the Crown alleges from the fact that they succeeded in their object and stole $30,000 or more in cash and coins and then disappeared into the night with so few leads for police to follow up on, this was no spur-of-the-moment crime.
The day before the robbery, Natalie Walker says the two defendants showed up at the unnamed man's ex-girlfriend's house in Cambridge. They were in Mr Hoggart's car, an old Vauxhall Victor that had to be crash-started. Later that same day, a car matching that description was seen by a Maramarua local not far from the Red Fox Tavern.
The Crown says it's difficult to think of a legitimate reason to park with the engine still idling, as that noisy brown and green wreck of a car was, for 2 minutes on that angle, looking back at the tavern at 8:45 on a Friday night. The occupants didn't stop and ask for directions, they didn't buy petrol, they weren't changing the tyre like the other ones were, they didn't go into the dairy. The Crown says their actions are consistent with the offenders casing out the tavern for the robbery that happened the very next night.
Lawyers for the two accused will give their closing addresses to the jury tomorrow. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
It's 14 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The wait to find out when the Trans-Tasman bubble will open continues, with the government set to announce a date on April 6th. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says while she knows what opening quarantine-free travel would mean for people, many New Zealanders are nervous and they need to be cautious. She says a range of boxes need to be ticked before Cabinet will be satisfied the bubble can open.
1, that our response framework for when there are cases in Australia is fit for purpose and ready. 2, we have measures in place to effectively contact trace travellers from Australia should we need to. 3, all technical issues are resolved. 4, that we have the appropriate regulatory mechanisms in place. 5, that airlines, airports and agencies are ready. And finally, that the Director-General of Health has provided an up-to-date health assessment.
Ms Ardern is defending how long it's taking to get the bubble open, saying it's extremely complex and the goalposts shifted.
We now will have to deal with different circumstances in different states, which does add complexity, but it is not insurmountable. What I would say is that there's no other countries in the world who have been working to an elimination strategy who are now trying to maintain that whilst opening up travel between the two. So we are having to create a brand new rule book. Now, we've done that before and we're doing it again here, but it does come with complexity, particularly for New Zealand, more so than for Australia.
She also warns that any travel across the dish will come with an element of flyer beware.
This change in approach isn't without risk for travellers. We may have scenarios where travel will shut down one way, and it may therefore leave travellers for a period of time stranded on either side of the Tasman. That's one of the downsides of moving through this arrangement, but it does mean that we can find a solution and open up more quickly.
Jacinda Ardern says a travel bubble could potentially see thousands of people arriving from Australia, and it's important that before opening the gates, the government has an ironclad plan ready to go. Agricultural Minister Damien O'Connor is under fire for saying COVID-19 has taught the tourism industry not to be so cocky after losing its spot as the top export earner to dairy. He made the comments late last week at Central District's Field Day. His West Coast Tasman electorate includes Franz Joseph and Fox Glacier, some of the hardest hit tourism-reliant communities in the country. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Tone deaf, shocking and kicking businesses when they're down. That's how Senior Minister and West Coast Tasman MP Damien O'Connor's remarks have been described in his electorate. Glacier Country Tourism Group co-chair Rob Jewell can barely believe that sentiment came from his MP.
shocked and disappointed. I mean, here's a former tourism minister who obviously knows the industry very, very well. To make that sort of comment is just quite shocking. He was also himself a former tourism operator some years ago, and I would have thought he, has a good understanding of the industry.
Tourism was worth roughly $42 billion before the pandemic and was the country's biggest export industry, contributing 21% of foreign exchange earnings. As a tourism operator, Rob Jules says businesses are proud of their industry and its contribution to the country, but they're not cocky.
Frankly, everyone will definitely be hurting from those comments. He knows full well from his visit to the community how badly we're hurting, how many people we've lost out of our community, how many more jobs and businesses are under threat while the borders continue to be closed. And, if there's anyone who has a first-hand account of that, well, it would be our own West Coast Tasman MP.
He'd like an apology.
An apology would go a long way, but we're talking about a very experienced minister who's been around for a long time, knows the industry, knows his own constituency. So I would have thought at the minimum an apology, but quite frankly, I'm just really shocked that he made the comments in the first place after only having been in those communities such a short amount of time ago and knew the amount of pain that is going on.
Westland Mayor Bruce Smith is disappointed with the remarks.
With the benefit of hindsight, I would probably hope that he wouldn't say that again. He is a former Minister of Tourism, and when you're in an environment where people are losing their homes, they're losing their businesses, their cash flow has been decimated, giving them a wee kicking on the way through is not the way to do it.
He says West Coasters are a resilient bunch of people.
When the bubble opens up, they'll be back in business and they'll be going well. In the meantime, I think the Be Kind message and the supportive message, which we've all been attempting to ensure that comes across, is something that is really important. And perhaps the minister was just having a bad day, I don't know.
Bruce Smith says their MP is well versed in the community's hardships.
Sometimes things are taken in a different context. I mean, let's face it, the tourism sector has had a great run, especially in Westland over the last several years, and it wasn't hard to get a bit cocky about things. Perhaps a bit of balance needed, but look, as I say, I'm sure that if he could wind back the clock, he just simply wouldn't have said that.
National Party's tourism spokesperson, Todd McClay, says the minister's comments were out of touch with the devastation caused by the pandemic.
Look, it's really disappointing. It's out of touch and it's tone deaf. What this senior Labour Party minister doesn't seem to realise is the businesses he's calling cocky are hardworking Kiwis who have borrowed against their homes and poured their life savings into their tourism businesses, and they're faced with closure.
He says the Prime Minister should step in and tell the West Coast Tasman MP to apologise. Damien O'Connor didn't directly address questions about his remarks or apologise. Instead, he released a statement saying he is concerned about hard-working tourism businesses, including those on the West Coast. He says many business sectors will be rethinking how they plan for shocks of this scale as the pandemic tests our resilience. For Checkpoint, Core Tess Brunton, TNA.
Kiwis are gambling more than ever before, with $250 million spent at the pokies in the final months of 2020. That's the highest figure on record, according to new data from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Alice Stewart digs into the numbers.
Despite a global pandemic, lockdowns and job losses, New Zealanders spent more gambling on poker machines in 2020 than ever before. New figures from the Department of Internal Affairs show each adult spent the equivalent of $204 at the pokies last year, and most of that was spent in the 3 months to December. The quarterly spend was $252 million, spent across 14,781 poker machines outside of casinos nationwide, the highest since records began in 2007. Department of Internal Affairs Director of Gambling, Chris Thornborough, says the results were unexpected.
We've been tracking the pokie money through COVID, and we knew there was going to be a
impact, but we were surprised by the bounce back once the pokie restrictions were eased. We didn't anticipate that there'd be quite as vigorous a bounce back as there was over the December quarter.
Overall, annual gambling profits were down $128 million, but that's because COVID-19 stalled access to pubs, clubs and casinos. But online gambling for Lotto was up, mostly due to our lockdowns. Kiwis spent $631 million buying Lotto tickets in 2020. That's an increase of 13%. The chair of the Gaming Machine Association, Peter Dengate-Thrush, says the fast bounce back that gaming machines have seen is part of a wider trend in New Zealand's economy.
New Zealand in general has not suffered as much from the COVID experience as we might have done. We're seeing rebounds across the whole of the economy. You have a look at the GDP figures for last year. I was having a look earlier. I think overall we're seeing a rebound in that quarter of 14%, but goods in that final quarter, the whole of the economy has not done as badly under a pandemic as we might have done.
By law, 40% of poker machine proceeds must be distributed as grants. Peter Dengate-Thrush says the increase in gambling is a much-needed boost for New Zealand communities.
We put out, $300 million worth of grants into the local community, keeping sport and culture and art activities going all over the country. So it's an enormous endeavour, and it's an enormous advantage to New Zealand.
Pub Charity Chief Executive Martin Chair says the increase was not unexpected.
A significant number of people that are locked in New Zealand now. The population continues to grow with people coming back, and people just have nowhere to spend their money, and so it is going to show up in retail spending and discretionary spending, which gaming machines are just a part of that.
He also noted that the increase in Lotto is part of a bigger trend to online gambling, which he says is far more damaging to communities.
It's inevitable that we're going to see this migration of lots of activities online, including gambling, and unfortunately most of it's offshore, it's unregulated, it doesn't produce any returns for the community, it can't be taxed. So it's a very disruptive and destructive trend for the industry.
Central government classifies pokies at level 4, the highest category due to their risk of addiction and harm. The Problem Gambling Foundation works with people who are addicted to gambling. Chief Executive Paula Snowden says the latest stats are concerning, but not surprising.
Our clients told us that they experienced only relief when the venues were closed during lockdowns last year, but we know they returned to poker gambling.
She says 50% of poker machines are located in poor communities.
So the people losing their money are poor people in poor communities, and what we say is we've got to stop focusing on the 40% that becomes charities and think about the 60% of the losses, because they walk out of poor communities.
On average, every adult New Zealander gambled $572 in 2020, made up of $128 at casinos, $160 on Lotto, $80 at the TAB, and a whopping $204 at the pokies. Mō te hōtaka o te atanei, ko Alice Stewart tēnei.
More than 6 million Australians are now eligible for the coronavirus jab after the country's medical regulator approved the domestic production of the AstraZeneca vaccine. The first locally made batches of the jab should be ready within days, meaning the nation can begin the next phase of its vaccine rollout. As the ABC's Stephanie Dalzell reports, more than 1,000 GP clinics are ready to help.
In the far northwest of Victoria, GPs and nurses at Mallee District Aboriginal Services in Mildura are preparing to join one of the biggest logistical exercises Australia has ever seen. After receiving 160 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine just yesterday, CEO Jackie Turfrey says 10 people will be vaccinated today, with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people aged 55 and over now eligible for the jab.
So it's a bit of a relief, to tell you the truth. Our view is that the more people we are able to get vaccinated, the sooner any of us are going to be able to return to any kind of semblance of normality around our day-to-day lives.
People over 70, critical workers like police, and people with underlying health conditions can also get vaccinated as part of this Phase 1B stage of the rollout. But AMA President Omar Khorshid says many GPs remain frustrated, with some clinics receiving as little as 40 doses to administer this week.
It's certainly still very difficult to book an appointment, largely because a lot of the practices were not completely ready for this and have been caught by surprise. The good news, though, is that there are more practices coming online every week, up to 4,500 by the fourth week, and that'll make appointments much more available for those who are really in a hurry to get their vaccine.
Restricted access to imported doses of the vaccine has delayed the rollout, but late yesterday the National Medical Regulator approved domestic production of the AstraZeneca vaccine. And while each batch still needs to be tested by the Therapeutic Goods Administration, Health Minister Greg Hunt says the first doses will be released within days.
Stephanie Dalzell reporting in Australia. Thousands of people partied at a music festival in the Netherlands this weekend, despite the rest of the country being under lockdown. The 2-day event is one big experiment to judge whether there's a safe way to allow large social gatherings without risking the spread of COVID-19. The BBC's Anna Holligan has more.
Surreal as it might look, a reminder of what life was once like and an opportunity to pilot a way back to this.
Great! I'm just really happy that we can go and party again. What does it feel like?
Euphoric!
1,500 people managed to get a ticket for this, and everyone here had to show a negative test before they were allowed in. Everyone is meant to be wearing a mask. They aren't. They either don't realise or they don't care. And of course, the risk with an event like this is when people stop following the rules, that could potentially affect everyone outside this controlled environment.
Soon, they were all mixing and the masks had mostly vanished.
Once you're into the mood of dancing and partying, they fly away in no time. They become a party hat, as I usually say. As all these people are tested and known negatives, of course, this is not a normal situation. You have to see them as test bunnies during an experiment. This is not normal life.
There will be people who think it's unethical to use these young people like guinea pigs. What do you say to them?
All these people, all the participants know that there's a minor risk. They're well aware of it. We believe from the first data that we can say the risk is not much higher than staying at home.
And the government is paying for the scientific research.
This event will inevitably raise eyebrows and questions about how ethical it is, especially when neighbouring nations are locking down. Here in the Netherlands, the infection rate has gone up by 25% since last week. In what sense is this valuable when the risks are still so great?
Yeah, if it will only give us the data to reopen the society. If you plan it right, you can do safe things. So this is not an unsafe event.
The entertainment industry in the Netherlands and around the world has been shut down by measures to stop our social interactions. The isolation has huge consequences for businesses and our mental health.
And that report was by Anna Holligan from the Netherlands. Just some feedback before we go on the travel bubble. The Prime Minister announced a date to announce the travel bubble. 6th of April, was it? Yeah, is when the announcement is coming. This person says, I want to see whānau, but when it's safe, and I trust the people who have got us to a position that is the envy of the rest of the world. We'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. It will be a fortnight before the government announces the start date for a travel bubble with Australia. There have been no repercussions for any corrections officer over the treatment of women held at Auckland Women's Prison. The company that produces the reality TV show Police 10/7 is strongly denying claims of racial stereotyping. The brakes might be on the long-awaited walking and cycling path across the Auckland Harbour Bridge due to technical issues. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
They've shown that if you protected 28% of the ocean seabed, you would increase seafood production by about 6 million metric tonnes.
Live with local, national and international